For this IBTV Spotlight, we're going to focus on investment. Investment in CGT has long been an issue up for discussion. As the landscape shifts year on year, region to region, we continue to evolve what we think and what we do, and how the cell therapy companies continue to advance. Today, we're going to hear from investors their insights from Phacilitate Investor Summit, sharing their predictions and expectations for the investment landscape for 2025 and beyond. Let me now turn to my panel, and let me introduce you to Audrey, Becky, and Tony. As an investment in CGT continues to evolve, what trends or shifts have you observed in the CGT investment landscape over the past few years? And how do you foresee this changing in 2025?
So I'll take the historical perspective, and what I'm actually really excited about. When I started in this industry, it was all about the science, right? And how can we get the science to work? And then we shifted in a big picture, how do we get manufacturing to work? And now what I'm hearing more and more of is, how do we get this to work commercially? And how do we start with that end in mind and really think through, knowing that along the way, the journey's going to throw you some curveballs that are going to change your plan, but do you have a plan that where you can see how a new therapy, new science can translate to new benefit for patients? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, and it's not just about the approval, right? It's also about the distribution, as we've seen with the recent approvals. It's great that you get to the finish line with the FDA, but you also have to make sure that physicians and patients and distribution in particular with autologous cell therapies, it's incredibly important to be proximate to the patient. The patient has to get there a month in advance to stay a month after, and it's very difficult on the family. And so we have to find a way to make it more accessible and of course affordable.
Well, and exactly, thinking about that infrastructure and how do we need to change, it's driving changes in the healthcare system. How do we change the healthcare infrastructure to accommodate and make those therapies even more successful?
Yeah, and I think also the last few years, I mean, if you're talking about 2021 or 2022, we saw the stock market hit a peak during that period, and it became increasingly more difficult to raise capital on the same information. And so there's been a flight to quality from the perspective of, you have to have data, later stage assets are getting funding more readily than early stage assets. And so if you can bootstrap your way, which is very difficult given the cost, to later stage, that certainly helps from a fundraising perspective.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the who's going to do what is still pretty much settling out today. And, talking about capital, I think, investors, what they're looking for is who's going to survive, right, in terms of who's going to be the manufacturers, who's going to support the biotherapy companies that are out there today before they really make that bet in terms of capital on some of these organizations.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what the therapeutic developers need to think about much earlier nowadays is almost in preclinical, pre-phase 1, how does the therapy going to be covered by payers? Who is going to pay for that, right? So that's really what I see as a change, where before we really didn't look into the pricing models until after phase 1 into phase 2. What I'm hearing you say and what I'm hearing throughout the end of 24, 25, especially for cell therapies, we need to start thinking about the cost of the final therapy. How will the payers pay for this? Who is going to pick up the tab? And how do we optimize it? And a lot goes into cell therapies, right? So if you're a therapeutic developer, you have to think about not just manufacturing, but logistics, cryopreservation, scaling up, and all of that. That certainly is a shift that will continue into 2025, thinking earlier, many steps ahead.
And as we've shifted from rare disease to wider spread indications, that becomes increasingly important.
Right, absolutely. So for investors, what key factors will drive your decisions when evaluating CGT opportunities in the next few years? And what are you prioritizing when assessing the risk and return?
Well, I think some of it depends on the product, right? In terms of is it something that's been established? There's a lot of data out there, starting to see some growth. That may be where you want to invest in terms of the manufacturers of that product. Again, it is a risk betting on some of the companies that are out there today, right? So who is in a good cash position, is close to cash flow break even, who can weather the storm, as it's, so to speak, in terms of not needing future investment right away, right?
And I really like, of course, I like interesting science, right? I like companies in the white space. But I really, working with my team, like to look at companies that are being creative about how they think about the infrastructure that they're going to leverage to deliver their therapy. And if they're a fresh product and they're absolutely committed to that quality, what does that mean for centralized manufacturing, for transport, for the equipment that you use to do your manufacturing? All of those things coming together. And when a company can talk about, articulate a really cohesive plan that has creativity in it to solve those problems, I love that.
That's
Love
great.
that.
And you're forcing them to think about these things if
Yes.
they haven't so far as part of their investment discussions.
Right.
That's great. So perhaps we can talk about how has the geographic landscape for CGT investment evolved, and what regions do you see as emerging hotbeds for innovation and investment?
It's interesting. I actually paneled a discussion last week for the Italian Trade Association. And I know the deep roots of gene therapy in that country, but it was interesting to hear about the cell therapy innovations that are occurring in Italy right now. So I find that obviously there's pockets in the United States that the typical biotech clusters, San Francisco, Palo Alto area, Boston, and North Carolina has become an interesting hub for manufacturing. Ohio, the state of Ohio is giving huge incentives for establishing businesses there. There's been some interesting developments in Texas, but globally, you're seeing a lot coming out of Asia and China that with Trump 2.0 will be interesting to see how that impacts the development life cycle of a drug for those that were going to China or taking IP out of China, in particular for trials. And then Singapore, Korea, throughout Europe. And also, by the way, interestingly enough, in South America, you've heard a lot of stuff about Brazil. Mm-hmm. So there's been some interesting global trends that will be interesting to watch over the next 5 to 10 years.
I love that perspective.
No, I think, and when you're talking about national health systems that where you don't necessarily have this payer-provider dynamic,
Yes.
there is an interest in getting new technologies in place faster if they're efficacious, right? If they actually have data behind them that shows that survivability is much better. And my experience is there are definitely regions in Europe that are focused in Italy is one, and I found Switzerland to be another, and I found Spain to be another. Whereas it seems like Northern Europe is more budget conscious with some of these things.
And that's fascinating because I think 5 years ago we only talked about U.S. for the majority of time. So I absolutely love the trends in this discussion.
Well, and all of the development is happening, I think, truly happening nearly worldwide at this point. I am really interested in what's going on in India and watching what the companies there are doing to truly democratize access to these therapies. I haven't gotten enough access to feel confident that this is a model that we want to perpetuate, but really interesting to see what's coming up there.
Well, let's continue to talk about sort of the future, because I think we're going to talk more about globalization. So what role do you believe vendors like CDMOs and technology providers play in attracting investment and how can they position themselves to support the evolution of CGT development to investors?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we've given our backgrounds, but I did start and scale and then ultimately successfully sell a CDMO that specialized in cell and gene therapy. And what we saw when we were talking to clients and potential counterparties was even before they went to raise capital or in the process of raising capital, they would come to us because investors are very interested to know where, how, when, and how much are you going to do your manufacturing. And so we were almost part of the raise and at times invited to the investor meetings to get the investors comfortable. So I think just knowing who you're going to manufacture with and how much it's going to cost is important, and obviously the quality of that manufacturing. But then second, your vendors, as a startup enterprise or a therapeutic developer, or any startup for that matter, I've been through this, you can find vendors to not act as your investors, but can creatively structure your contracts to help to align incentives and risk for milestone-based payment arrangements, or even, I know back in the day, some CDMOs were doing investments even. So there's some creative ways that you can work with your vendors as well.
I agree. I think I was one of the therapeutic companies that came to you because I was looking for a raise and I needed to understand, well, how much is it going to cost me? So it's and now Lacard is on drug delivery side, so we're very much part of evolution of, well, how do you deliver the therapy? So now we're part of the evolution on trying to understand how do we continue to evolve how we think about cell therapy and how we can talk to investors about, well, what about solid tumor and cell therapy? Can we change the paradigm? Can we change the game in drug delivery? So very much part of this ecosystem and evolution.
So as a vendor to folks that manufacture, I know it sounds contradictory, but I think where we can help is standardization plus flexibility.
Yes.
Right?
Customized standardization.
Right, customized standardization.
That's good.
So, there's, when you look at the folks that manufacture biologics, they have strict training programs, strict programs in terms of processes to do simple tasks, right? But you do need the flexibility to handle multiple protocols, right? And have systems that are able to handle multiple protocols, batch design or protocol designers and batch designers. But I think the industry could stand for some standardization when it comes to simple processes, training, the types of personnel that they bring on board.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. So a very important topic we all want to talk about, of course, is the regulatory changes, the unknown, right? But what impact are regulatory changes and approvals are having on the investment climate for CGT? Now, I'll start this one because I lived on a therapeutic side as a founder and CEO back when a lot of changes were occurring. We had to go back every time we had to reconstruct our CAR-NK, CAR-T construct and go back to the beginning. So, but more changes are to come. So as an investor, we started out talking about de-risking and having certainty. There's very little certainty, but we're all in it because we want to make a difference for that one patient. So let's talk about the unknown, the regulatory changes, and how do you feel and what do you think about as an investor when you looking at the therapy and potential changes?
I think there's been a huge shift in the FDA over the last couple of years, first with the headcount increase and now with the platform technology and the ability to plug in a gene of interest or certain manufacturing. We're seeing some good headway there and on the analytics side too. I think with Trump 2.0, there's some uncertainty around the administration, who's running the FDA, who is going to be, if there's going to be new leadership at CBER, and how that's going to impact the drug life cycle.
Yeah, I think this is a place where we need a mind shift to be advocates for the regulation that we
I love that.
want.
Yes.
And the regulation that we see as being appropriate for this segment. These are not small molecules. These are not antibodies. These are not chemical entities. So, and importantly for me, this isn't blood per se. Right. So how do we create an appropriate regulatory framework that allows for these products to move through? I think we're the people who have to step up and advocate. It's the corollary to asking our developers to be creative. We need to advocate on behalf of them for the kinds of regulations that will help this industry be effective and continue.
There's many people watching now smiling and applauding this comment. Yes, we need advocates, and we need to work together on this topic.
I had the opportunity to actually participate in a, not on the panel, but I witnessed the panel with Mark Peters, director of CBER, and I walked away very optimistic from the standpoint that the FDA now is approving more and more products every year, so that the growth rate of products approved. But one of the things he mentioned was not having to approve, the entire manufacturing process, right? And utilizing a platform approach. And I think if we can do that, I think that'll make it a lot easier on the manufacturers.
Oh, beautifully said. So to sum it all up, looking ahead to 2025 and beyond, what are the major factors, trends, maybe market demand, innovation, partnerships that will shape the future of CGT according to each of you?
Feasibility. I think that's getting this into action, getting it into the market, and moving from the excitement around the science to the excitement around clinical outcomes.
Yeah, and the movement to standardized manufacturing, right? I mean, taking away from the scientists and really getting manufacturing experts involved in terms of standardizing processes.
Yeah, and I think in terms of tools, technologies, and supporting mechanisms outside of the therapeutics, I'm walking around this conference, and it's amazing how many companies are doing similar or the same things. And I just there's going to be mass consolidation. There's going to be winners. There are unfortunately some losers. And then what is the end-to-end technology that's going to make sense from a curated manufacturing perspective and analytics perspective that really simplifies the process and brings down the cost?
I'll bridge it all together. I think from my perspective, there needs to be more collaboration partnerships to bridge the academia to early biotech, to bridge from early biotech into how do you take it further into more scaled manufacturing. I think I'm going to advocate for continue to partner and collaborate together across the industry. Well, thank you so much, my panelists. I really appreciate your time and wonderful, wonderful thoughts for 2025 and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.